What you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences. And I've always sort of found you would see things that you would not automatically have come across.
Hello and welcome to the Parliamentary Review podcast, the podcast that puts leadership at the fore. I'm Jonathan White, and in each episode I'm joined by directors, CEOs, CFOs, government ministers, chairmen, presidents, maybe one day even the President of the United States. Impeached or not, Mr. President, we don't mind. The aim is to discover who these people are, the people who get up each morning and make the world work. We discuss everything from what Workington Man really wants from Boris Johnson to the latest British exports to Wisconsin, and of course the innovation and success in the country that make it all worthwhile in the end. We also get their take on the current political and economic state of the country. Later on in this episode, you'll have the chance to hear our exclusive interview with Lord Pickles, former Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, Chairman of the Conservative Party, and of course, current co-chairman of the Parliamentary Review. But for now, we are joined by Dr. Dawn Price, Managing Director and co-founder of Mistura Enterprise Limited and Mistura Informatics Limited. Mistura are developers of medicines information and medicines adherence applications and are based in Ashington, Northumberland. Dr. Price joins us today to discuss how the business has grown into an international success story, their exciting new products that her and the team are working on, and what the future has in store for the sector and the business. Dawn, welcome.
Hello, pleased to be here.
No, thank you very much for joining us today, Dawn. And I know it's been a few months, in fact, probably since Mistura has been in the review. I thought it might be a wonderful place to start, if perhaps, and the listeners I know would love to know what you and the team have been up to since.
Oh, that would be good to let them know, Jonathan. I think for Mistura, being part of the parliamentary review process has been very, very positive. Representing best practice in healthcare has brought us quite a few opportunities, which has obviously promoted us with new developments and new innovations in health. So thank you for that.
It was good to hear. And I know, and we'll go into a lot more detail, I think, because there are some exciting projects I know yourself, Dawn, have been working on. But before I think we get there, I think it'd be smashing if we could take a look back for a moment. Of course, the business now founded over 10 years ago, in 2008. Clearly, it's gone from strength to strength since then. What was, Dawn, your inspiration and the inspiration behind the business in the first instance?
Oh, it is tracking back. We've been around quite a few years, and most people know us for the development of the Choice in Medication mental health website, Jonathan. This is it's a comprehensive specialist information written very, very simply for people to understand, and we provide information on medication, on all mental health conditions, and we provide most of the common drugs in 18 different languages for the UK. We also provide the system to Australia and New Zealand.
Superb. And of course it was in Australia and New Zealand where you really did make your name overseas, and as you've called it, and for those people that aren't so familiar with what has become known as CNM, Dawn, could you go into a little more detail about that?
Yes. Well, the problem is that mental health conditions tend to be stigmatized. In addition to, it's always been a Cinderella service within the NHS. Very, very hard to get funding for the level of patients that we have, always have been. And I am an expert in mental health, as is Professor Stephen Bazier, my business partner. And what we found is to help people in their treatment, our mainstay is medication. And the problems are, as many people are aware, that they bring side effects and adverse effects. And there's been a lot of media coverage about people being frightened to take medication. And indeed, the World Health Organization recognise up to 50% of people don't take medicines as intended. And part of the job of an expert pharmacist is to counsel patients. And counselling is to help them understand risks and benefits, and hopefully to get them to take the medication and improve their health outcome. Obviously, mental health isn't unique here. This is all conditions.
Of course.
But particularly with NHS, we have the problem of the stigma and sometimes not able to access experts. Choice in Medication, C&M, provides an expert 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on a web portal.
And you're so right, Dawn, to point out that especially when it comes to areas of mental health, it's an issue that has been so neglected. And I think, to be frank, Dawn, it's a case sometimes because it's just in the past, and even still today, it's just not particularly a fashionable area of healthcare to be talking about.
No, it's not fashionable. There has been significant improvements in awareness raising, and particularly to social media and people on social media platforms being exposing their experiences and trying to normalise situations, as well as personalities in the entertainment world highlighting the challenges, which has for us brought a lot of profile and corporate social responsibility, where we've had a lot of TV ads regarding caring for mental health and well-being. But essentially it still is, from a funding perspective and resources and healthcare professionals, is fairly thin on the ground, and it does need to be addressed as part of the hopefully the new regime going forward within the government. Certainly,
and I know that's something we'll certainly get talking about in a little bit more detail very soon. But I should let the listeners know, Dawn, that the success of C&M has been extraordinary, and I know off the back of that, you have developed there a system called MAPS, and I should let everybody know that stands, has the very catchy acronym, stands for Medicine, a Patient Profile Summary. And this has already become extremely successful, of course, in the United Kingdom. And I think we'd love to know perhaps not only how important that system has become to some people, but how, again, that's something that can be utilised in so many different areas of healthcare here and abroad.
Yeah. Yes, well, Medicine's a Patient Profile Summary. MAPS is also known as the Medicines app, which is sometimes a bit simpler. But again, it's based on the experience we had with C&M, only about a couple of hundred drugs in mental health. The reality is, across the world and most other conditions, you've got maybe 5,000 plus medications. So what the extent of having mental health information and C&M performing very well for helping patients, we needed to build a system that could provide simple, understandable patient information bespoke across all health conditions. And essentially that's what MAPS does. It's summary information, and it's across all medications, and it's written with the most important things people need to know to help encourage them to understand risks and benefits.
And I know that more recently, of course, Dawn, you and I think this is an extraordinary story, and the product developed off the back of it is incredible. You've been working on your MySOS project, and I would love for you, Dawn, not only just to explain the importance of this, but how you came about this after quite a personal experience.
Yes, being a healthcare professional within the digital health tech world, unfortunately, as happens to us all, I had a health-related scare in June this year. When I was then, instead of a healthcare professional, I was a user of the emergency services, and I don't have relatives that live with me. And by the time I got to hospital, I had to be resuscitated. And the only information that the crew, the A&E crew, had on them was literally a name, so they could only provide supportive treatment. And on reflection of my journey to then coming out of hospital and looking back, was I had been very lucky, and time to treatment was key to helping me. And also going forward, I was unfortunate to have a pacemaker. My heart had it just literally would not beat properly, and I had to walk around with paperwork constantly on my person, and also identity bracelets, so that patients who present, you can understand from the ambulance service, they realise there's a pacemaker which needs to be treated differently.
Absolutely.
Now that wasn't going to be helpful for me in my position, travelling around quite regularly.
Right.
And also the identity bracelets or medical emergency bracelets weren't fit for purpose. So my team managed to solve a challenge of how we made this very quick and very easy to access information. And this was through my SOS. Yeah.
Exactly, and it really is, and before you get onto it in detail, John, it really is a 21st century solution to something really, and as when you discovered, what the things you'd have to carry around with you, it seems so outmoded and outdated, but do go on with now the actual product itself.
Well, the system itself it's a digital identity, a QR code, which is linked to a very secure service. Obviously, we provide systems to the NHS. So the data of your identity on a QR code, on a bracelet that you wear, is held securely, but also as the emergency service access that data, it is able to push your identity onto the ambulance systems, which reduces the time they need to identify you, to understand your conditions and medications, and therefore they can treat you quickly, as opposed to only supportive until they can establish your identity and your background.
And in developing this, frankly, superb idea, Dawn, product, how have you found the process of doing that? Have you found support from the right places? Have you found more challenges than you thought?
The challenges were very similar to what we'd overcome in our development of maths, which was helpful for us. The additional benefit was being clinicians within health, we understand how difficult it is to enable IoT, the Internet of Things. So this solution should help the NHS, not just with ambulance services, but also with handovers in A&E, but also transferring through wards and possible discharge. So when you ask about adoption, it's so new, considering we only developed the system in June. As of last week, we have been asked in the North East Ambulance Service that they could collaborate with us to bring this system across the UK, and simply because it has so many perceived benefits that we can digitise further. Metadata can be transferred. What I mean by that is, instead of a phone call in an emergency, the call handlers can pick up the data straight away, which would save 30 seconds a call on 16,000 calls a day.
Absolutely.
So, So there's unmet benefits that we still haven't scoped yet. So being able to partner with the ambulance should help.
Fantastic. I think for a lot of people, 30 seconds might not sound a lot, but when you put it in with that perspective in mind there, Dawn, not only does that 30 seconds help the person who's making the next call, but also the person making that call then?
It does. It also increases capacity for the ambulance service because it means they can turnaround times will be so much quicker. It means in an emergency you'll be able to access services quicker, and as you say, the time to treatment that was scanning, that the crew understand your conditions, they can potentially, that 30 seconds can save lives, as it did with myself, really.
Absolutely. Now, with all that in mind, and you've brought it up already, Dawn, whether no matter what year it is, it always seems to be the same issue. It is a question often of funding for the right issues, and we are speaking just after the general election results have been made clear, and it's perhaps not the result that a lot of people had predicted, and it's certainly all changed very much where you're based on in Northumberland.
Yeah.
Now, with all that in mind, and with the promises that have been made by the Conservative Party, what do you hope, Dawn? What do you hope to see in the next 5 years that really can be done to make a difference?
I think for me, there's definitely two significant points. To highlight, the first thing was going back to what we discussed with choice of medication, is there's been an independent review of the Mental Health Act. And I would like to see the modernising of this Mental Health Act. One example would be advanced directives where people can decide to decline medication treatment in mental health when they're unwell. I know there will need to be technological solutions to enable that to happen, and my SOS actually could help that happen, but it's something which is sitting waiting for to be able to put through the process and get that into the in the review, then into the bill, and then taken forward the how to do it.
Exactly, because I mean, so much for those that don't know, there's so much of the current legislation, much of it dating from the Act of 1983.
1983.
Yeah, so there's so much, not only just on the scientific side of things, but on the social side of things that need to be changed. And I know the interim report was published last year. Let's hope, once all said and done, that it's as thorough as possible.
Absolutely. And I suppose the other thing that is sitting waiting is the NHS recommendations to the government. They were put forward in September 2019 about the restructuring going forward. And you're right, there's new bills, new restructures, while there's old, outdated legislation that needs addressed. So, as you've mentioned, a lot to do. Not much time, competing priorities, but I am positive and seeing how you mentioned the Northeast, the change in opinion has put some confidence into the government, hopefully, that people are behind trying to get a unified country with years of unrest to do something positive. And I would like to see the government actually respect that and be able, where they can, to be able to prove that. And I know we had Boris Johnson up in some of those constituencies acknowledging the change in support, but it's been very significant. And I think it's a time for the government to lead from the front and be able to deliver on those priorities. NHS is one, social care is another. And what people forget to talk about is that the NHS was established when diseases were killing people in the 50s. Medication was the mainstay of what is helping bring people longer, healthier lives. people are getting older, but primarily it's medication driven, and you have 50% of old people on 5 or more medications a day, 23 doses, and 93% of old people, we're talking over 65, which is not really old, but 93% of them are on medication. So as well as the social care, there's all the medication issues, and then there's obviously the long-term condition management and acute care. So a lot to do, but I think people have voted based that they feel positive that the government can try and address some of these priorities.
I think you're right, Dawn, and I would love to know what your feelings on this. I think there was a great deal of frustration that no matter how you voted in a referendum that we had 3.5 years ago, clearly what has happened is that all of the oxygen in the room has been sucked away from things like the health service and social care, education, the economy even. And I think with the votes that were cast on Thursday just gone, the great hope is that once this Withdrawal Act gets through Parliament, the government can once again focus its energy into all of the things you've just talked about.
Absolutely. And being from the north and from one of what used to be the biggest mining town in Europe, yes, you camp down, batten in the hatches and focus on the priorities. And yes, absolutely, education's in there. And so obviously is security, the police force, as well as health. But as an SME, small, medium enterprise, we're trying to create jobs in this area. So success of our systems is to bring jobs, which hopefully would boost the economy. And also, after mining, there was not much else in the north. But I would like to be one of the small companies. We've been profiled as one of the top 101 health tech innovators on Business Cloud. I would love to be able to offer a new tech industry within the north that can hopefully provide a boost to the economy.
Well, Dawn, you've already started in the last 10 years a marvellous business, and we can only see from here it going from strength to strength always. And perhaps let's just take I'm conscious of the time, but we should wrap up soon. But let us take a step back and look at the company looking into the future. I know you've done some exciting things recently, again, of course, partnership with the University of Sunderland. You're looking for further expansion. How do you hope the next 18 months will pan out for you and the business?
Well, we do also have a KTP application with the University of Northumbria to build a wearable medicines adherence device.
Excellent.
And essentially, after giving people information, essentially to understand medication taking behaviour remotely, as a clinician, if I could see online how they perform, I could switch their treatment to something personal to them, because we've got all of these evidence-based trials, billions of pounds to say a medicine will work if you take it so many times a day. But if you can't take it for one reason or another, it's pointless trying to give them more and repeat prescriptions. And that leads, we know half of people don't take them. That's £1 billion worth of wasted medicines, plus potentially 7 billion of mismanaged medicines and an £18 billion spend. So this device we're working on has to be, we have a patent pending. The University of Northumbria, our materials science department, hopefully will help us with this. It will take 18 months, and then hopefully we can manufacture in the northeast, as well as to give healthcare a remote monitoring system and engage people in the medicine taking behaviour with a new wearable device.
Well, it will be an exciting few months ahead, Dawn. I hope we can talk about it again very soon. But for now, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you again, Jonathan, for the opportunity.
Pleasure. I hope you all enjoyed our chat with Dawn, and especially learning more about the challenges facing the sector and how the whole team at Mistura are continuing to raise standards. If you haven't heard it before, coming up now is our conversation with the Parliamentary Review's co-chairman, Eric Pickles. Lord Pickles served as Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government in David Cameron's cabinet before receiving a peerage in 2018. Lord Pickles remains active as the United Kingdom's anti-corruption champion and the country's special envoy for post-Holocaust issues, as well as being a keen vexillologist. That's flagged to you and me. I hope you enjoyed listening as much as I enjoyed speaking to Eric. Here it is now.
Lord Pickles, thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Now, I'm sure you won't mind me reminding the listeners that you've been involved in politics, both local and national, for quite a number of decades. Indeed, before the days we were in the common market. Given your experience over those years, what thoughts have you had over the last few weeks and months about the current political situation the country finds itself in?
Situation is quite dire because we have a parliament that is by and large useless. It's like a bored teenager on a long drive, and it knows what it doesn't want, and it's so bored with Brexit, but it can't agree. So no matter what you put up, it's against it. Are you in favour of a referendum? No, I don't want that. Are you in favour of remaining within the single market? No, I don't want that. Are you in favour of... No, I don't want to do that. No. And are you in favour of leaving without a deal? No, we don't want to do that. So it's against everything, but there isn't enough votes to be in favour of something. And it could be by the time this podcast goes out that Boris has started on the process of the bill, because we'll be voting on that today. But even then, what people don't seem to understand, this is not the end of Brexit.
Right.
This is barely opening the door of Brexit. We've got years of negotiations about trade agreements, relationships with Europe, putting down pieces of legislation. We get our agriculture, our fisheries, our financial services into place. Brexit is going to go on and on and on and on. I'm sure we are.
Now, the question is, I should actually remind listeners that we are talking on the day that the second reading of the European Withdrawal Act will take place. So as we speak, we don't quite know. As, well, perhaps like the government front bench, don't know what's going to happen. You compare Parliament to a petulant teenager. What do you do to a petulant teenager to sort it out? Is there a chance that it will see sense and push this through this bill without wrecking amendments? Is there a chance it will vote for its own for a general election? How do you see this playing out at the moment?
The sensible thing will be to put this deal through, because I've always been of the view a deal is better than no deal, because this is just the beginning. In order to start the process of Brexit, start the process of the United Kingdom taking over powers that it's not really exercised for 40 odd years, the smart thing is to get this thing through now. But in a way, it's not about Brexit itself. If there was a free vote, this deal would have gone through. Mrs May's deal would have gone through. But it's about politics. It's about a Labour Party that thinks it has a chance, trying to make the Prime Minister, whether it was Theresa May or Boris Johnson, look as though that they are in office but not in power, of delaying it as long as possible. There's a lot of talk about an election in the autumn, maybe back end of November, beginning of December, something for us to look forward to before Christmas. It's beginning to look less likely. It's beginning to look as though they might want to drag it into spring to get as far away as possible from the rather decisive moment that Boris came back with a deal. We have to remind ourselves that nobody thought he could deliver a deal, and it does quite shock them. And if you remember, all this process went through in order to ensure that we're left without a deal. When we have a deal, suddenly, oh no, it's not that kind of deal. We don't want that kind of deal. We want something different.
I think the vast majority of people in this country, whether Remain or Leave, now would be very satisfied for this to come to a amiable conclusion. And as you correctly just said, because when it does come to those in the opposition who claim to want this to end, and then introduce wrecking amendments that introduce new objections to it, the general public are getting quite frustrated.
But you've got to understand that quite a lot of people don't get beyond a small area within Westminster, sometimes a cliche referred to as the Westminster bubble, and go back to their own patch. Now, by and large, everybody hates their MP, except when they're at home doing the fairs, wandering around, helping people. So they, in a way, they're cosseted to that great, which I feel is coming as a tsunami of change.
You, of course, MP for Brentwood for
25 years.
Absolutely. What would you? I mean, of course, you resident there as well, despite being a proud Yorkshireman, obviously representing a good Essex seat. What would you say to your old constituents right now? Hang in there, it'll be all right.
Well, it's different when you're a member of Parliament because you've got to kind of toe the government line a little bit. So one thing I found now is I've got my weekend back and I say what I want, and I think I always say to our constituents is that it is pretty hopeless down there.
Excellent. Well, on that, I think, honest assessment, it's something I think the Parliamentary Review has always done quite well, talking frankly about problems, issues, and also not just good practice, but leadership.
Well, I was used to read it when I was a member of Parliament, because, what you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences, and I've always sort of found it quite a kind of a chatty magazine, but also you would see things that you would not automatically have come across. And certainly have attended the receptions over the year, and it's amazing the things you kind of pick up.
And I think it's important to stress it's not because politicians are uninterested, because honestly, as you all know more than anyone, it's an issue of time. And to be able to have a channel and a platform where you can keep communication lines between businesses, schools and policymakers is so exceptionally important.
No, I think so, and it's important that it's beholden to nobody. People, pay to be part of the publication, pay to be members, and it's a way of not being beholden to government, not beholden to anything.
Now, echoing the words, of course, your fellow Chairman Lord Blunkett has said, what some might not know is that you started your political journey perhaps even further left than David Blunkett.
Oh, absolutely, I was a communist.
Now, what was it?
At the age of 14, I was bought the Trotsky's History of the Russian Revolution, and I read it from cover to cover. I tried to read it a few years back, and I just couldn't follow anything.
Oh, so I was going to say perhaps you might know the minds of the show front bench better than they do themselves.
From my position when I first joined, I would regard them as recalcitrant running dogs of the capitalist system.
Now, what was it then that moved you from radical Marxists to running the only inner-city council controlled by the Conservatives in the 80s?
Well, I was very young, and I was fascinated by what was happening in what was then Czechoslovakia and Dubček, and the revolution that was taking place there inside communism, and the way in which he was repressed by Mr. Brezhnev, and the tanks and taking over. I was so angry. I'm 16, remember. I'm really angry. I thought, what's the most outrageous thing I can do? I'll join the Conservative Party as a protest. And I kind of sticked around. My family thought it was the funniest thing that ever happened to us. I was Eric the Tory. And
I think you announced this quite grandly as a grand protest.
I did indeed. But, I kept going down, and it was an exciting time. people were developing the ideas of what the Conservative Party should be. Selsdon man, even Heath looked radical. We had different ideas, and just it eventually clicked. And at some point, I became a Conservative, and that was 51 years ago. I think I'm definitely 100% a Tory now.
Through and through.
Through and through.
Although I do know the story, most people might guess that a dialogue Conservative like yourself would have perhaps a portrait of Mr. Thatcher or Mr. Churchill in their office. But who is it that you have?
I had Che Guevara.
And
Which I always had him over my left shoulder of visitors, and they always used to kind of, you see their eyes going up and thinking, who, I can't possibly be it. Someone asked me if it was Desi Arnaz. I thought it was married to Lucille Ball. But no, the reason I did that was to remind me and to remind my officials that without constant vigilance, the cigar-chomping comet would take over.
I'm sure David Bunk was in the room to reply to that, actually. But in that long journey, you eventually ended up, of course, in 2010, doing something most Conservatives would never thought they would have to do, but in a coalition government with, of all people, the Liberal Democrats.
That's right.
Now, for something I think perhaps today more than ever, people and our politics seems to be almost wholly determined on how we voted in a referendum 3 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, the most normal thing would happen after something like that would be the country would come together, and if anything, we're more divided. I mean, I thought working in the coalition, I'm proud to have been part of that coalition. I'm proud to have worked alongside the Liberal Democrats, who I think realised that, like all minority partners in a coalition, they would suffer at the polls.
Do you think we've lost the ability recently as a people to work with those that we might disagree with on issues more than we used to?
I'm not sure that's right. I mean, you can see various members of the Conservative Party working closely with Liberal Democrats and Labour to defeat their own government, but it's not a thing I think I would want to encourage.
Quite. And I should remind listeners, we are recording this in Victoria, just over the road at Cardinal Place, a fantastically new development site which wouldn't have been there without some of your legislation. What was the proudest?
I personally approved it.
Absolutely. What was the proudest moment, do you think, in serving Secretary for 5 years?
It's my actual proudest moment. We did a thing called Troubled Families, which was the first centre-right attempt to deal with poverty and to deal with difficult families that were causing a disproportionately large amount of call upon the state, and it was on the basis of tough love. It was on the basis of getting people into jobs. It was about dealing with the kind of the family as a whole, not just one or two individuals that were having a problem. And I'm pleased that it's continued.
And since, I should very much stress, since of course you're stepped down to being an MP, you do have your weekends back, but that's not to say you haven't remained very active and very busy. Of course, continues the government's anti-corruption champion, shone the harsh light of day over malpractice in the local government. Indeed, the Queen's speech we've just had includes some of your recommendations from 2016. I think a couple of things on that. First of all, are you surprised, I may imagine you may not be, at some of the backlash towards, in this country, introducing voter ID for voting?
It is absurd, and it's particularly absurd coming from the Labour Party, because it was largely Labour's vulnerability that got my interest in trying to do something about it. And it's a bit like saying, you're requiring people to show some ID, that this is suppressing voting. It's a bit like saying the post office is suppressing parcels because they demand to see some ID. I think they've got a bee into their bonnet that this is something like that goes in the state to repress. It's not. It's about giving confidence to the system. Now, the Electoral Commission and foreign observers have warned us for such a long time that our electoral system is vulnerable. And it's to misquote John Major, we are really sort of old maids cycling to Evensong and Warburn. Yeah, I mean, it's such a basic thing. It's an important thing. And it was kind of interesting in some of the trials. They did a focus group with a bunch of young Asian girls. And they said they thought the process of a photo ID would actually give them a greater confidence in the fairness of the system. I make all kinds of recommendations to stop postal vote harvesting, to stop various fraud taking place, to stop intimidation at counts, to stop intimidation outside polling stations.
And I think you referenced it earlier, the Westminster bubble. A lot of the places where this occurs and the places where this does go on are places where perhaps many members, many people in the press don't usually go to.
No, they don't. We saw a YouGov poll that said the overwhelming majority, well in the 60%, thought this idea was sensible.
Yeah, and I imagine you're quite proud that recommendation is in the speech.
Yes, I mean, I'm a bit frustrated they didn't do it sooner, but nevertheless, I'm very happy that they are doing it.
It's as if the government's time has been taken up by something else and we've not focused on anything domestic.
Absolutely.
But with a man, though, with his roots in local government, do you think, and how much you've worked with that report, especially looking at them carefully, how would you rate our current state of local municipal politics?
Local government's very good. I mean, local government, don't get me wrong, it's by and large corruption-free, and it does a remarkably good job. And it was, in truth, my worries about local government and that these measures were brought in. I don't believe the fraud is big enough to be able to take a parliamentary seat, but it is big enough to take a council. And if you are negligent, uncaring about the probity of the poll, you're likely to be equally negligent about the awarding of contracts to your friends. So it's all past that. But local government is a very enduring part of our constitution. I got a bit of stick because we had to take some money from them, but by and large they survive very well.
Excellent. Now, beyond obviously that work, you also, of course, the British envoy for post-Holocaust issues.
Yeah, sure.
I think very dear to your heart. I know you've done some fantastic work recently, including with obviously former Shadow Chancellor from the Review, Ed Balls. Would you mind, if you could just let the listeners know what projects you are working on with that and really the importance that has to so many communities around the country?
Well, I used to be very unpleasant about Ed Ball, and he used to be very unpleasant about me. But I found working with him remarkably easy, and we've not had a single row in 2 years, and by now we're beginning to be able to finish each other's sentences. We're building a memorial to the Holocaust next to Parliament with a learning centre below it, and the reason why the Prime Minister chose that site is that it was David Cameron, and he wanted to ensure that when people left the memorial, they would look and see Parliament and recognise that it was the last bastion against tyranny. But more important, to remind people who work in Parliament that the legislature has a choice. It can either protect its citizens or it can oppress its citizens. And we do know that that it was a compliant legislature that brought in the Nuremberg laws. And at a time when there are parts of Europe that are seeking to rewrite their history and seeking to see themselves as only the victims of the Nazis, I'm determined that we should tell the truth in an unblinking way. We are, I suppose, at a critical crossroads when the last survivor is likely to be no longer with us within the next decade and a half. And at that point, we do know that history starts to be reassessed. I think it was Simon Sharma that talked about this. And he was referring to the French Revolution. And of course, most of the books written in the 1850s are the ones that have shaped our view of the French Revolution. But the difference is this, that slightly over 100 years ago, my grandfather Edgar grabbed hold of his Lee Enfield and walked out of a trench in the Somme and walked towards the Germans. And within a few minutes, most of the people he'd been brought up with, most of his friends were dead. Nobody doubts that he did that. But there's a whole industry out there that doubts that the Holocaust took place. So that's why it's important that we help frame that narrative.
And you referenced as well, it's so important, especially at this time of history, so many years afterwards, that young people in schools get the correct education about it. How do we compare as a country in doing that compared to some of our European friends?
We I think, compare remarkably well, particularly because we've got a mixture of things. We ensure through the lessons of Auschwitz that 2 pupils from every secondary school go to Auschwitz each year, that they have a preliminary meeting, a visit and a wrap-up. We ensure that Holocaust Day is remembered in January. Now, I can remember starting that, or I'm not starting it, but being part of a foot soldier of people that put it together. And, it was like one man and a dog, but now it's quite a massive, it's a massive event. So I think we are quite good at remembering that. I think where we perhaps do need to have a wider understanding is beyond the death camps. And we need to kind of understand the Einsatzgruppen, which was the roving murder squads, how important they were. You were more likely to have been shot in a ditch than to end up in a death camp. The hinterland of that is Lithuania, where I was last week talking to colleagues, and through Belarus and the Ukraine. And it's really important that we ensure that we register where those death sites are. And
I think certainly, and I'm going to sit down next to speak, which hopefully won't be too long away. It's something I think we'd be very happy to keep updates on how that project is going, because it's so important and people do need to be aware of it. Looking to the future, though, I imagine we're actually very content and happy because the former Prime Minister, friend and colleague David Cameron just released his book, and you quite unscathed from it.
I came out, he was very nice about it. I even bought the audio version because he was reading it, and he obviously, but there was a fair bit of affection, and I'm rather glad they left out one or two of the other embarrassing things.
Maybe another time.
Yeah.
But it's important, I think, and I'm conscious of the time, but I think it's important that today people have become so perhaps caught up in what's happening in this country regarding Brexit. Looking to the future, what would you say that it's a positive thing that this country has to look forward to?
Well, we're a large trading nation. We're a large economy. We're a liberal democracy, and it would be good to get through Brexit over the coming years. And it would be good to start to look at some of the social issues that we need to tackle. Those have been left behind by our economic progress. And it would be good to see some solid investment in this country, both in terms of its infrastructure, but also in terms of the way it operates as a democracy.
And I know that's going to be a huge focus of the next review. Because thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
As always, it's been a pleasure interviewing and learning from our guests. I hope you all enjoyed listening. Until next time, I'm off to St Stephen's Tavern to raise a glass to raising standards. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. You can find every episode on iTunes, YouTube and Spotify. The views expressed by each guest in the podcast are their own. They do not represent the opinions of the Parliamentary Review, Westminster Publications, Lord Pickles, Lord Blunkett, David Curry or any other guest on the podcast. If you'd like to know more about the Parliamentary Review, please visit www.theparliamentaryreview.co.uk.